This was an act of terror, and a particularly cowardly act of terror aimed at innocent civilians, aimed at people going about their lives who had no idea of what was about to hit them.
This is a Fox News alert. Terror has hit New York City again. At least 8 people are dead so far after an attack that authorities describe, as you heard there from the mayor, as an act of terror. A man driving a truck down a busy bicycle path near the World Trade Center Memorial. After plowing over runners and bike riders, this man hopping out of a truck yelling "Allah Akbar," according to police. The driver was shot by police on the scene and is now in custody, being treated. Correspondent David Lee Miller is down on the scene of this attack. David Lee.
Bret, authorities still trying to figure out exactly what happened here, but this was an act of terror. It began a little after 3 o'clock. We talked to one of the witnesses who was on the scene at the time. His name, Baier. He was afraid for his life, but he wasn't so afraid that he didn't pick up his cell phone and record the video you're now about to see. This video shows the man believed to be the perpetrator running through the streets on the west side of Manhattan. According to witnesses, he had in his hands 2 guns. Authorities now believe that they were a paint gun and or a BB gun. Moments after this video was recorded, the perpetrator was shot in the leg by police. He is now being treated at Bellevue Hospital here in New York City. At this hour, we are told that at least 8 people were killed and as many as a dozen were injured. Apparently, this individual got behind the wheel of a rented car, a car that was rented from Home Depot, and he began to drive along a bike path, entering the bike path, for those who know New York, along Houston Street. He then began to drive south, and then he exited Houston Street on Chambers Street. That's the street we are now on, and it was here that he apparently got out of that vehicle after hitting a school bus, slightly injuring a number of people on that bus, and began to run through the streets. And that's when you saw the video recorded a short time ago when the gunman was shot by authorities. According to a number of reports, this individual was 29 years old, and he shouted out "Allah Akbar" at the time of the incident. He has been described as being of Middle Eastern descent. And let me show you live here, Bret, the scene here in Lower Manhattan, just so you can get a sense of what is taking place. This is a mixed area. It is a residential area. There's also a lot of commercial activity. You can see that there is still traffic flowing. It is Halloween. There are many people in the streets, adding another eerie element to what's happening here, wearing costumes. Many of those who were here at 3 o'clock when this tragedy began to unfold thought this possibly might have been some type of Halloween prank. That was not to be the case. The mayor of the city of New York saying this action was intended to break our spirit, but the city of New York saying that the Halloween parade, slated to take place not very far from this location, is going to take place as scheduled, but with significantly more security. And lastly, Bret, as you pointed out, this is an area that has dealt with acts of terror in the past. We are about half a mile or so from the World Trade Center, so many people here still very much on edge, despite the fact this incident took place at 3 o'clock, now a little more than 3 hours after the attack. Nerves still very much on edge. This now as authorities continue their investigation, but at this hour, at least 8 dead. The perpetrator, believed to be a lone wolf, 29 years old, now in police custody, recovering from a gunshot wound. Bret.
David Lee, quickly, we heard from authorities there in that news conference in New York that, as you mentioned, the Halloween parade is continuing on, but the presence on the street will be significant. Obviously, authorities don't believe there is a current threat ongoing. Otherwise, they would have done something more than they're doing now with this Halloween parade, etc.
That's right. Authorities believe this was a lone wolf, but there is an abundance of caution here. And you can take a look down the street here, and this is Chambers Street. The incident took place about 2 blocks down this street. It is still sealed off. There's still a very heavy police presence here, and I suspect it's going to remain that way for the next several hours. An increased security present not just here, but in other parts of New York City as well after this attack at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Bret?
David Lee, thank you. We should point out the Department of Homeland Security just putting out a statement moments ago saying they're closely monitoring the situation, working with federal, state, and local partners. The president, we're told, has been briefed, and he is aware of the situation as we speak. And joining us now, Republican Mike McCaul. He serves as the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Bret.
Breaking news, obviously. What can you tell us about what you know?
This was the 9th vehicle assault used by ISIS. Remember Nice, we saw this happen previously.
So you think this is ISIS?
I believe when an individual yells out Allahu Akbar, all the indicators and hallmarks of an act of terror, and I think that's true in this case. We know for 2 years they've called out in their internet magazine to attack by vehicle, by explosive device, or by knives and small-scale attacks. So this is very much in accordance with the directives coming out of Raqqa, out of these messages. And Bret, I believe as we are crushing the caliphate, defeating ISIS in Mosul and Raqqa, this is going to be the new sort of age or chapter of terror that we're going to see, are these vehicles, these knives, and explosive devices.
And it's obviously very hard to defend against. We're told that this was a 29-year-old man of Middle Eastern descent. There's some names floating out there. We haven't gone with them yet, that he was an Uzbek national. There's some tie to Florida. You can't pin all of that down yet.
Not yet, but this is what the FBI and NYPD call flash to bang. These cases can happen so fast. One person radicalizing very quickly and then killing 8 people. And it's probably the hardest thing to stop. A larger scale operation like the 9/11 plot, we could probably very likely stop today. This is the case that worries us the most.
The difference between self-radicalized, inspired by ISIS, and directed by ISIS, and how significant that difference is.
You know, I think those lines are blurred now because of their internet bandwidth reach globally. They can radicalize people all over the world, and it's still in the name of ISIS. We saw a picture of a cell phone at the scene of where this happened a month ago, or around August time frame, with an ISIS logo, sort of predicting that this may happen. So I think those lines are blurred.
What do you? A picture of a cell phone in this area where this attack happened today,
with the ISIS logo on it. And I think investigators are looking at that photo to find out it was posted on the website of ISIS in August. And so that's something that investigators are looking at right now in terms of, are there other people involved? Right now it looks like this is a lone wolf case.
So we heard from authorities there in New York about the efforts to talk to these truck rentals, car rental dealerships around New York City, to engage them, to say if there's anything suspicious to tell us. Obviously this was a rental pickup truck, and that is something that it sends up red flares for authorities?
I think the SHIELD program in New York to reach out to find anybody suspicious renting these vehicles, of course, to stop them. Remember the '93 World Trade Center bomber, Ramzi Youssef, used a Ryder rental truck to blow up the World Trade Center. So this is nothing new to New York, and unfortunately they're the #1 target, and this event happened very close to Ground Zero. We're worried about the Halloween parade tonight, but also the New York Marathon on Sunday, I think, is very much on the radar of law enforcement.
So this would be the first ISIS attack, I guess, if it turns out to be that, self-radicalized, since when? I mean, Orlando?
You know, Orlando was a big case. You had in Ohio a vehicle attack, but it was very marginalized. So I think the biggest one probably since Orlando.
ISIS took credit, at least publicly, for Las Vegas, but that never panned out.
That didn't pan out at all. And the databases, they ran his name through all the FBI databases. That was not relayed to ISIS.
When you look at this today, what do you think? Are you surprised that this hasn't happened more to us as a country?
Yeah, I'm always surprised this hasn't happened more. And again, as we crush the caliphate, you're going to see this branching out and trying to conduct more small-scale operations. But I'm very proud of what we have stopped. We stopped a Times Square bombing from occurring. Just this last month, we arrested an individual that was going to blow up Times Square. There are countless cases where the FBI and NYPD and others have taken down ISIS in the United States and stopped these things from happening. That's the good news, but we have to be right 100% of the time. Obviously, in this case, we didn't catch it.
You know, we spent a lot of time covering the story of the day, of the moment, the narrative that's ongoing here in Washington, but there are a lot of things happening below the scenes that we don't focus on. As chairman of House Homeland Security Committee, you know that. Have we stopped a lot of things in recent months?
We have stopped, again, the Times Square bombing, many plots. I can tell you the number of arrests and plots have gone down since 2015, 2016, but we still have 1,000 investigations in all 50 states.
1,000 investigations tied to what in all 50
Potential
states?
terrorism.
In all 50 states?
In all 50 states. That's how broad it is. And as long as they can propagate this jihadist material over the internet, that's their bandwidth, and it's global. Until we can get these companies to take that down, we're going to continue to see this activity.
Were you surprised when you heard this today?
I wasn't. I was just having a conversation in the Capitol after our chairman's meeting with a member of Congress, talking about what a soft target that place is and how lucky we have been that we haven't seen that kind of attack take place. It's something we always worry about. It's something that always keeps us up at night. But I do think, again, the victories we've had over ISIS in Iraq and Syria have diminished their external operation capabilities out of the region. That's the good news. The bad news is the internet is still radicalizing them and instructing them how to kill people here in the United States.
And is there anything more we can do if we're going to be a free society to harden targets? I mean, this is a bike path. I mean, anybody could have driven down that bike path.
I think, again, you know, see something, say something. I do think working with the internet companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, taking down the sermons of al-Awlaki, taking down the sermons of bin Laden, taking that stuff off of the internet so that people vulnerable to that kind of messaging won't become a radicalized individual that pops up, like in this case, and kills 8 people.
And anybody can rent a truck.
Anybody can rent a truck, and unless there is some legal basis to deny that rental, we really can't stop that.
Do they do rental receipts? Do they check through all of that about, you know, the renting of vehicles, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and then through Operation Shield, there's a very good, public-private outreach that NYPD conducts. NYPD is one of the finest. They're our best, and they work closely with the FBI, the Joint Terrorism Task Forces. I go up there periodically to get briefed by, the commissioner and Miller up there. And they have stopped a lot of bad things from happening, but it's just a constant wave of people out there that are looking at these images over the internet that concern us.
So just to review, you're convinced that this was an ISIS attack?
To me, it has all the hallmarks. When somebody yells Allahu Akbar in public, when somebody mows down pedestrians, and following the advice of the ISIS Sheikh Adnani, I am convinced, it's my judgment, that this was an ISIS attack.
And now investigators look at the web of connections this guy may have had to other people.
Precisely what we want to know is anyone else involved in this? Is there a further conspiracy? Obviously with the Halloween parade tonight, but also this New York Marathon on Sunday. I know they're scrubbing everything they have right now to ensure that there's no one else connected to this awful act of terrorism that we just saw happen.
Mr. Chairman, how significant that he is still alive? Most times, or in many times, we've seen the attacker get killed or kill himself. He was shot, we're told, by a police officer, but he's been treated and is alive.
From a law enforcement prosecution standpoint, intelligence standpoint, very important because of the information inside of his head. when the Boston bomber was shot and killed, we lost all that intelligence of what he was doing in Dagestan, radicalizing. Was there any direction, say, from Raqqa, Syria, or Pakistan, as we saw in the Times Square recent plot? So he has a lot of information in his head, and that's the kind of information that I know we'll be getting to the bottom of through interrogation.
And I know it's early, but you don't have any sense that this guy was on any alert, or that authorities had seen him or heard of him before?
My sense as of right now is that he was not on the radar. I think this posting of the cell phone picture of the ISIS logo as far back as August, where the attack occurred, I think is going to be of interest to investigators.
And you're talking about a cell phone picture that was at roughly that bicycle path?
Correct.
On the west side?
Right.
Fascinating. Mr. Chairman, we appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on short notice.
Bret, thanks for having me.
Short while ago, the governor of New York warned expect a stronger police presence in and around New York City.
We will be vigilant, more police everywhere. You'll see them in the airport, you'll see them in the tunnels. It's not because there's any evidence of any ongoing threat or any additional threat. It is just out of vigilance and out of caution.
Senior correspondent Eric Shawn standing by at Police Plaza in New York City. Eric.
Good evening, Bret. It is a day of pain, but New Yorkers are resilient, and we will not give in. Those are the words of New York Mayor Bill de Blasio in this room here at police headquarters within the last half hour. It is interesting to note that there is that Jersey City connection to this case and previous attacks, radical Islamic terrorist attacks in the city. We're told that that Home Depot pickup truck was rented from a Home Depot in Jersey City. That is where the Ryder van was rented back in 1993 that was used to drive down into the garage of the World Trade Center to blow it up. But officials here, when I asked, would not say if there were indications that if this indeed is radical Islamic terrorism right now. They won't confirm that, nor will they confirm if there is a wider international net or tentacles of a foreign terrorist organization involved in this, or if this suspect, 29 years old, is self-radicalized. That is all part of the investigation, and they are not yet publicly releasing his identity. The officials here sought to assuage and comfort New Yorkers in this time of pain after this terrorist attack this afternoon. Here's Governor Andrew Cuomo.
New York is an international symbol of freedom and democracy. That's what we are, and we are proud of it. That also makes us a target for those people who oppose those concepts. And we've lived with this before. We felt the pain before. We feel the pain today. But we go forward together, and we go forward stronger than ever. We're not going to let them win.
Well, for decades, New York has been the target of radical Islamic terrorists. The first, really, back in 1990, the shooting of Rabbi Meir Kahane in a Midtown hotel by El Sayed Nosair. He was a follower of the cell of the blind Sheikh Abdurrahman from Jersey City. They went on to be convicted of a landmark terrorist plot to bomb the Holland and Lincoln tunnels. And then, of course, there was the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center and dozens of other plots that have been disrupted. One, a car bomb set in Times Square, thankfully did not go off. And of course, there was the bombing on 23rd Street in the Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan by a New Jersey man. He had recently been on trial. Mayor Bill de Blasio referenced the history of this and the attitude of his fellow New Yorkers. Here's Mayor de Blasio.
Based on the information we have, we know of 8 innocent people who have lost their lives and over a dozen more injured. We know that this action was intended to break our spirit. But we also know New Yorkers are strong, New Yorkers are resilient, and our spirit will never be moved by an act of violence, an act meant to intimidate us.
The New York City Police Department has a wide-ranging anti-terrorist effort. There are New York City police detectives actually stationed and posted in world capitals around the world to deal with this. There's also the Atlas program, in which officers patrol Midtown Manhattan and sensitive sites. And Deputy Commissioner John Miller here referenced the SHIELD program, in which at least 20,000 private businesses over the past few years have been contacted with indications and told what to look for potential terrorists. That did include 148 truck rental sites. So clearly this Home Depot will be a center of investigation of how the suspect apparently may have been able to rent this van and, of course, this pickup truck. And, of course, if he has been on any databases in the past, anything that's terror related. And as of tonight, the focus does go to the annual Halloween Day Parade, which is a festive, raucous event in Greenwich Village. We will be reporting from there later on tonight. Clearly, sand trucks, police cruisers, and other type of measures to block the side streets to prevent anything such as that we saw in Nice, in which a terrorist drove that truck down the boulevard next to the sea. One of the efforts that the New York City Police Department has already engaged in dealing with the Thanksgiving Day Parade to try and prevent any copycats of the international terrorism that we've seen so far, sadly, around the world, and sadly, here striking us, Americans, here at home. Bret.
Eric Shawn at Police Plaza. Eric, thank you. Let's get some analysis now from former Assistant Director of the FBI, who now works with the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, Ron Hosko, and retired Green Beret Michael Waltz, who served as Senior Counterterrorism Advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Your take, first of all, on this, Ron, and as you look at this, the tactic obviously does fit what we've seen, these vehicle attacks in recent days, recent months and weeks, back to Berlin, Nice, Spain. You've seen it again and again.
Right. It has the ISIS fingerprints. It has the ISIS DNA, I believe. This is the sort of attack that ISIS has called for. They have made innocent civilians as legitimate targets of their attacks. You know what concerns me, Bret, is within the last 10 days, 2 weeks, the head of MI5 had said that the current terror threat stream is as intense as he's ever seen it in 34 years in Great Britain. The speed with which attacks are being planned, the number of targets for them, some 3,000 active investigations, 500 of them pretty intense. I think here America's threat is a fraction of that. But still, the speed and the intensity, the time between flash and bang, is very, very concerning for the counterterrorism professionals in America.
You heard the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, Mike McCall, mention this, Mike, about Adnani, this ISIS spokesperson, if you will. In Atlantic magazine, back in 2015, they wrote it this way. Sheikh Abdul Muhammad al-Adnani, the Islamic State's chief spokesman, called on Muslims in Western countries, such as France, Canada, to find an infidel and smash his head with rock, poison him, run him over with a car, or destroy his crops. To Western ears, the biblical-sounding punishments, the stoning and crop destruction, juxtaposed strangely with his more modern-sounding call to vehicular homicide. There has since been a lot of quotes about using vehicles, and we've seen that in efforts.
Well, and ISIS and Al-Qaeda have their own magazines as well. In the case of ISIS, it's Inspire magazine, and they've actually been calling for a truck type attack in New York, in Vegas, in LA for a couple of years now. You know, one should ask how they're producing their own magazine, and just to take a step back for a moment and to go a little strategic. That's why I think we have to stay on offense. We can only do so much defense against these types of attacks. That's why the president's decision to stay engaged on the offense in Afghanistan, what the Green Berets are doing in Niger against Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, the Navy SEAL raid last night against ISIS in Libya, the president's speech in Saudi Arabia on his first trip calling on Muslim-majority nations, moderate Muslim-majority nations, to take this problem on from the inside. It's all interconnected. And Bret, I think my bottom line here is we are in a global war against Islamic extremism. It's at war with us, and we are fighting it in Kandahar and in Raqqa and now we're fighting it at home, unfortunately. But we have to stay on offense to take these sanctuaries down, and then put a broader strategy in place of how do you undermine the ideology. Just as we undermined and discredited the ideology of communism, we need to do the same thing with the ideology of Islamic extremism.
Ron, from an investigative standpoint, what's happening right now in trying to get the web that this guy had any contact with?
Right, they have speeded their way to the Home Depot. They are looking at every piece of
where he got the pickup truck,
where the truck was rented from.
And I think actually we're looking at that now.
It appears to be they are collecting across government every piece of intelligence that we have on this person to see, did the FBI ever touch him before, NYPD, the agency, NSA. To add to what Michael had said, I think part of that offensive strategy has to be renewal of 702 authority for NSA and the coordination with the FBI. We need to be listening to these potential targets overseas. If they are touching Americans, we want the FBI to have that information. We want them to action that information.
Brett, if I can just jump in very quickly, one thing that a lot of folks are no longer mentioning, but I want to be sure to point out, is Edward Snowden. He took essentially all of the apps, all of the software, essentially all of the systems around the world that we have trouble penetrating because of encryption, and dumped it out there for all of these terrorist groups to use. And I hold him accountable, whether it's Barcelona or London or now New York or Orlando. I hold him accountable as well for basically giving the bad guys the means to communicate. That's been very tough on our law enforcement and intelligence agencies.
I just want to point back to something else that Chairman McCall said, and that is looking at one of these websites, the picture on a cell phone of that area in the west side of New York City, a photo taken near Houston facing south, with the logo on the cell phone displayed, an ISIS symbol. Now, obviously, I don't think people at that point could say that this is where this attack is going to happen, but it does send a signal that they were looking at that area.
Unquestionably, look, we have a learning, evolving, metastasizing enemy.
Yep.
This is an enemy that is not here just for today, it's not here just for a couple of weeks. They're here seriously, and they have a long-term perspective on attacking America. The notion that they can post something up on an internal, a magazine that they're disseminating on the internet around the globe for anyone who wants to read it, they are looking to inspire just this sort of activity. If somebody takes that bait and they go, that's the fear of the FBI.
1,000 investigations in 50 states, in all 50 states?
Right. Being reprioritized every day at FBI headquarters, assets, resources being moved around to address the highest priority threats, and hoping, like the Brits and like the French, that we get it right every time.
I mean, that's a threat that we just don't even acknowledge or think about, the fact that there are that many investigations ongoing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the fact is, I mean, the ugly fact is the Bureau cannot possibly track and follow and stay on top of that many individuals. So, again, we can, unfortunately, we have to bat 1,000. The terrorists only have to get one through. And that's why, I keep saying over and over again, we have to stay after those sanctuaries. We may have defeated the Islamic State as a state that it like to call itself, but we haven't defeated it as a movement, and we're seeing it not only metastasize all over North Africa, but we're seeing it finally get infiltrators through. And the thing I can't overemphasize is people in that part of the world respect strength, and they respect who they think is going to win, because they're making life and death decisions every day, and that's why we need to hit them hard over there, while our brothers and sisters in law enforcement are defending us here over at home.
But I guess the question, Ron, is that for people who just walk around and say, how does this not happen more?
Right.
It seems like, what prevents the bad guy from getting the truck and going down the bike path?
Well, very little prevents this sort of activity. And as I mentioned earlier, that concern about flash to bang, that the space between someone being inspired to do this terror and actually taking the steps forward to do it is getting increasingly small. That's the space that law enforcement is typically working in. This is not Al-Qaeda, where they were trying to get you to a training camp in Afghanistan or in Pakistan. These guys are doing it on the internet and do it in your own methodology. So that is the concern of law enforcement. Fortunately, because of tips and clues, because of interagency collaborations, the FBI and their partners have defeated dozens of attacks here at home. One recently within the last 2 weeks in Miami, where an attacker wanted to detonate a bomb at a mall in Miami, or outside of Miami. The FBI's been incredibly successful, but as Michael said, we have to keep every puck out of the net. And if one gets through, you look incredibly bad. And so they will learn from this. They will figure out what was missed, what could have been caught, how to defeat it the next time. But unfortunately, this may be the new norm.
Yeah, and from a counterterrorism perspective, they obviously feel in New York fairly confident that tonight they're moving forward with this Halloween parade, and they are moving forward with, while a more presence on the street, trying to tell people to keep going about their business.
Well, that's right. The goal of the terrorist is to inspire fear. And the worst thing we could do is to hunker down and be afraid. I hope everyone up there, our fellow citizens in New York, get out tonight in defiance. We've seen that in Paris, we've seen that in Barcelona, we've seen that in London, that we will not be cowed. We are the United States of America. And as we saw, as I mentioned earlier, as we saw with the Navy SEAL raid in Libya just a few nights ago, you can run, but you can't hide. We will come after you, and we will find you, and justice will be served.
Yeah. So, I mean, these operations going after ISIS, it's not just happening in Syria and Iraq. It's happening all over.
It's happening all over. As we've discussed, 60 to 80 countries in any given day. We have special operators out there trying to keep this country safe.
Ron, Mike, we appreciate the time.
All right.
Pleasure.
Let's head over to the North Lawn, where White House correspondent Kevin Corke is covering reaction from the White House. Kevin, we understand the president obviously has been briefed about all of this.
Yes, you're right about that, Brett. We learned late this afternoon, shortly after the events unfolded in New York City, that the president had been briefed by his chief of staff, John Kelly. Then shortly after that, right around 5:30 p.m., he took to Twitter to express himself and express, I think, the thoughts you could argue of a great many Americans. The president tweeting this: "In New York City, looks like another attack by a very sick and deranged person. Law enforcement is following this closely. Not in the USA." A number of tweets I can share with you, including this one from the vice president. He wrote, "Saddened by the tragedy in New York City. Our prayers are with the victims, their families, and first responders. Those responsible must be held accountable." The First Lady, Melania Trump, writing, "My heart breaks for New York City today. Thoughts and prayers as we monitor the situation." And first daughter Ivanka Trump writing, "Heartbreaking news coming out of New York City, praying for the victims." Brett, as you know, as is customary in circumstances like this, the president will receive periodic briefings and updates on the ongoing situation, making available to those who need it in the New York State area and in the tri-state area just around Manhattan, any and all federal resources that they might need as they continue to investigate this horrific crime. Also, we do not expect the president to speak about this situation tonight. Of course, if that changes, I'll let you know right here. Back to you.
Okay, Kevin Corke live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. Just to update you again, this terror attack in New York City as described by the New York City Police Commissioner.
A male driving a rented Home Depot pickup truck entered the West Side Highway bicycle path at Houston Street, began driving southbound, striking a number of pedestrians and bicyclists along the route. At Chambers Street, the truck collided with a school bus, injuring 2 adults and 2 children. After the collision, the driver of the truck, a 29-year-old male, exited the vehicle brandishing 2 handguns. A uniformed police officer assigned to the 1st Precinct confronted the subject and shot him in the abdomen. The subject was wounded and transported to a local hospital.
Well, it looked like 2 handguns at that time. It turned out to be a pellet gun and a BB gun. As you heard House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Mike McCall say earlier on this program, this event in New York is obviously similar to other recent terrorist attacks that employed the same grisly tactics, using vehicles to plow people down. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen joins me now from our D.C. newsroom with more on that angle of this day. Good evening, James.
Brett, good evening. Officials at the Homeland Security Department and a member of the House Intelligence Committee Committee, in remarks tonight following this massacre in New York, are portraying it as most likely a copycat attack based on similar uses of motor vehicles as weapons in acts of terrorism in big cities. A spokesperson for acting DHS Secretary Elaine Duke, after noting that Duke had been briefed on the attack, stated, quote, "We have recently seen attacks like this one throughout the world." Likewise, Congressman Joaquin Castro, Democrat of Texas and a member of the Intelligence Committee, told Fox News tonight more people are being inspired as lone wolves over the internet. It certainly looks like a copycat thing, but it's too early to make that determination, unquote. Certainly, the use of vehicles to mow down large numbers of people is intensifying. The first incident like this, similar to this anyway, that we can trace was in Chapel Hill in 2006, but it resulted in minor injuries. The first large-scale atrocity that relied on this tactic was back on July 14th, Bastille Day, last year in Nice, France, when a Tunisian national drove a 20-ton rental truck into a crowd, killing at least 84 people. That, too, was an area near water. French officials later said the attacker, who was shot and killed, had become radicalized by ISIS online. 6 months later, Ohio State University witnessed a car attack that killed 11 people. But worldwide attention focused on Berlin on December 19, when another Tunisian national plowed into a Christmas market, killing 12 people. And then, of course, in March of this year, Britain reeled from a car attack on the Westminster Bridge that killed 4 people. The attacker also got out and stabbed a police officer on that occasion. In all, in this country, including this attack, at least 10 ISIS-inspired or Islamist terrorist events have occurred in the last 2.5 years, Bret.
James Rosen, live here in D.C. James, thank you. Senior correspondent Rick Leventhal is in New York, standing by with the latest. Rick?
And Bret, we heard the governor of New York say there's no evidence of a wider scheme, but important to point out that does not mean that they're not investigating very, very aggressively to make sure that there's no wider scheme. And our viewers may have picked up on that aerial footage of the Home Depot in Jersey City, where we told you a couple of hours ago that the FBI and Joint Terrorism Task Force had quickly determined this Home Depot truck had been rented from. I was told then by police sources that they had sent members of the JTTF to that Home Depot. And in the aerial footage, you can see some police tapes in the parking lot there. They are very likely looking to see if the suspect drove himself to that Home Depot, left his vehicle in the parking lot, rented that truck, and then drove it into Manhattan. And that may be why those vehicles were surrounded by police tape in that Home Depot parking lot. But authorities confirming are reporting that, in fact, this individual drove onto the bike lane on the along the West Side Highway at Houston Street just after 3 this afternoon, hitting people on their bicycles and pedestrians on that path at a pretty high rate of speed, driving south for 8 or 9 blocks before he hit a school bus, which had been driving along the cross street there at Chambers. And that injured a couple of people and a couple of kids on the school bus. At that point, this suspect then got out of the car and, according to law enforcement sources, yelled Allah Akbar before heading into the intersection, carrying what turned out to be a couple of fake guns, a paintball gun and a BB gun. And that's when authorities shot him. The NYPD, already down there, shot this suspect and sent him to the hospital. And Bret, we should point out, and you're looking at some of the video of him running through the street, he is being treated at one of the hospitals where a couple of the victims were also being treated. But obviously this guy is in isolation. He is under heavy guard, and authorities have a lot of questions for him and are looking for any links to anyone to explain why he might have done what he did. But we heard very clearly from the mayor, from the police commissioner, and from the governor that they do in fact believe that this was an act of terror, and they're investigating as such. We've also talked about increases in security across the city, Bret. And you know, after that incident in Times Square when someone went the wrong way up the street and drove onto a sidewalk and mowed people down there, which turned out apparently to be someone who was under the influence and not a terrorist, they put up barricades in Times Square to block those sidewalks from any other vehicles that might try something like that. But as we could see down here in Lower Manhattan, some of the access to that bike path was still open this afternoon. This person was able to drive that rented pickup truck right onto the bike lane. And you better believe they're going to start hardening those targets, hardening the security at the bike lanes that ring this city simply because of what this person did this afternoon, Brett.
Yeah. Listen, Rick, New York is probably one of the best, if not the best, at fighting this kind of thing. You know a lot of these men and women on that force and in law enforcement. What is their feeling tonight? I mean, is this a sense that this is a one-off, that maybe ISIS-inspired, maybe terrorist-inspired, but that the threat is diminished tonight as they continue with this parade and continue on?
Well, certainly the initial reports and the initial word that we've been getting from law enforcement was that they're treating this as a lone wolf, treating this as one sick individual carrying out a sick plot to hurt and kill people on a beautiful, otherwise beautiful afternoon in Lower Manhattan. But they are cross-checking everything. They're scrubbing this guy. They're scrubbing all of his contacts, and they're looking at the rental of that vehicle and any other contacts he might have had with other people to make sure or try to determine whether or not there might be some other sort of plot. And we've been hearing about the Halloween parade tonight in the village, in Greenwich Village in Manhattan. They're going to have sand trucks blocking cross streets, which they've been doing now with some regularity because of vehicle attacks. They're also going to have heavy weapons teams with long guns, snipers on rooftops, and other security precautions that might not have been there a few years ago, but has to be there now, and certainly even more so tonight in the wake of this horrific attack.
All right, Rick Leventhal, we'll head back for any breaking details. Rick, thank you. Just moments ago, the president taking to his Twitter account saying we must not allow ISIS to return or enter our country after defeating them in the Middle East and elsewhere. Enough! Exclamation point from the president. Just moments ago. Joining me now on the phone, Matthew Graham, founder of Graham Combat, who currently serves as a civilian defense contractor and a full-time firearms and tactics instructor of protective and low-profile operations. He was also a local law enforcement officer. Matt, lone wolf or group attack, really, the question is, how do you protect against something like this?
Yeah, good evening, Brett. And I don't know that you can, just like both guests on your panel have said. As we continue to take the fight to the enemy overseas, we really need to be ready here for what's going to happen. Low kinetics, individual operators, whether they're attributed to a group or not, what we're finding over the past couple of years is that they're able to act at will, and there's not much that we can do to mitigate it.
I guess we can take out the internet sites that inspire them at some point.
Yeah, but I mean, that's like banning books, right, and talking about ideas. So, you know, I think we all understand that whether you get information off the internet, looking at a website is not something that drives you to strap a bomb under yourself or to grab a car and drive it down a bike path. I think we know intellectually that it is bigger than that. And I think that's the big thing that we really don't want to talk about as a society. The threat here, even tonight in New York and other cities around the country for Halloween, isn't diminished. We can talk about it being diminished, and there may not be other acts, but when an actor wants to act, which they're showing that they want to do globally, we're in a fight, we're in a war, and as the SF soldier can tell you there at the desk, this is an insurgency, and at this point, they're taking lives.
Yeah, we're just getting word that Mayor de Blasio is heading down to that Halloween parade to check out security there. But from a counterterrorism point of view, from a shoring up point of view, that's a logistical challenge when you're dealing in big cities and big events like a Halloween parade.
Well, we have a huge country, and we're not going to be able to put roadblocks on every bike path, and we're not going to be able to funnel people into areas that vehicles aren't. As much as we change our defense posture, they're going to change their offense. So. And nobody wants to save your life more than you. So the idea behind it is you need to be ready, get your head up, look around, see what's going on, and carry tools that can defend yourself and fix yourself.
Yeah, and obviously with the increased use of these vehicles, trucks and cars, we've seen these attacks, as I said, in Berlin, in Nice, in Spain, all over, in London, and now here.
Absolutely. And how are you going to stop a person from renting a truck? And that's one of the difficult points. You had the chairman on earlier, and even as he said, we only know after the fact. The JTTF is cultivating that rental site, dealing with who has rented and what is the nexus to that rental. But we know that because we're seeing the front end of the truck ripped off on people that we live with and love every day. And what we need to do is press that fight sooner. And we're doing that globally, and as part of that response, we're going to have to deal with that threat here.
Matthew Graham, we appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you, Bret.
Let's bring in our panel here. Guy Benson, political editor at townhall.com. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio. Retired Green Beret, you heard from earlier. Mike Waltz, who served as a senior counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Dick Cheney. And Jillian Turner, former National Security Council staffer under Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Jillian, as we look live there in New York City, your thoughts on this day, this event, and kind of where we're going?
Well, personal comment quickly is that Manhattan's my hometown, and so this strikes particularly close to my heart. I've been on the phone with friends and family for most of the evening, making sure that folks are all right. It's just completely devastating that New York has been hit again. I want to make a comment particularly about ISIS's turn to, if this is indeed an ISIS attack, which, as Chairman McCall points out, it looks likely, bears all the hallmarks of one. Their turn to reliance on the use of vehicles, the weaponization of vehicles, is something that is going to have catastrophic consequences for possibly decades to come. While ISIS's reach is now definitively global thanks to the internet, this particular tactic makes all terrorism local for the effective future. It means that they can reach into any community, anywhere in the world, at any time, and find recruits and sympathizers who are willing and able to go forth and carry out terrorist attacks. And this is the 13th one this year. And since this first started with Nice in 2015, we're up 300% in terms of the lethality of vehicular attacks. So it's just devastating.
All right, I want to turn back to that interview we had earlier with Chairman McCall and take a listen to something he said during that.
This was the ninth vehicle assault used by ISIS. Remember Nice, we saw this happen previously.
So you think this is ISIS?
I believe when an individual yells out Allahu Akbar, all the indicators and hallmarks of an act of terror, and I think that's true in this case. We know for 2 years they've called out in their internet magazine to attack by vehicle, by explosive device, or by knives, and small-scale attacks.
Went on to describe, Mara, this one picture, image of a ISIS logo taken near that area on the west side that happened in August and popped up on a website.
Yep. And this is not very far from 9/11, actually, just right up the street from the site of 9/11. But look, this is an issue that is going to have to be confronted, balancing the United States citizens' demands for free life.
As
they don't want to.
Capitol Hill deals with this 702 renewal, which, by the way, is listening in to terrorists, even if they have connections with U.S. citizens.
Right. And the question is, we're going to find out in the coming days, was this person a U.S. citizen? Did he have any ties to ISIS in some way? Was he here legally? There are going to be a lot of questions answered, and then you can design the precautions accordingly. I mean, I don't know if every single rental car place in America has to have a list of people who can't rent a car.
Guy.
Especially if the person trying to rent the car has no record whatsoever.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is so frightening about this style of attack, going back to what Jillian was just saying. In the past with Al-Qaeda, around 9/11 and a few of the other major attacks, Madrid, USS Cole, these were highly choreographed, highly complex, spectacular attacks. Getting a car and mowing it into people is sort of the opposite of that, but it brings the threat home to everyone. It's a very low frills, low maintenance attack that can be inspired from far away or from a computer screen, and anyone virtually can carry it out. So that is what is scary about this. But if we're talking about fear, amid the loss of life and the tragedy in New York, I have to say, watching the leadership in New York moments ago during that press conference saying, hell yes, this parade is still going on. Hell no, we're not canceling it. We're New Yorkers, we're Americans, that's not what we do. That sort of gave me chills. That's the spirit of this country, even in a dark hour.
Yeah. You're looking live, by the way, from our affiliate WNYW, Fox 5 in New York, and that is a shot of the Home Depot rented pickup truck that this assailant drove down the bike path on the west side of New York, not far, as mentioned, from the World Trade Center, and plowed over people biking and running on a path on a pretty sunny but cool day in New York City. There was some early talk that he had firearms and that there were shots fired. The shots fired, actually, we're told, were from police shooting at this man. He actually had a BB gun and a pellet gun of some kind, maybe even a paintball gun, but he was injured. And there you see the video of him running. We're told that this is him with the pellet gun and the BB gun running into the street there, pursued by, you see that man there. I don't know what happened to him, but soon thereafter he confronted law enforcement and was taken down. He was shot in the rear end, we're told, and he was taken to a hospital and is being treated. Mike, that's a big deal to be able to get somebody who says they've got this guy in custody because he potentially provides information.
Well, Brad, let me just personally say and give a salute to the boys in blue in New York City tonight and to the NYPD. I've been in situations where you have only seconds to determine if it's, if they're friend or foe. We may remember in May when a vehicle plowed into Times Square and immediately folks were afraid it was a terrorist attack. Turned out it was a drunk driver. So when this guy hops out, he has something that resembles weapons. He runs, and the NYPD get after him and take him down, but take him down in a way that now he can be interrogated. Really, hats off to him.
All right,
great
here's
job.
One of the witnesses describing what he saw.
I saw a guy who had 2 guns on his hand, and he was just running in the middle of the street. And then I heard like 5-6 gunshots.
A couple of my classmates, we heard the shots, and then we went to the window and we seen 2 of the bodies lying down.
A car and a school bus collided, and people in the school bus got hurt. He was running around with a gun.
And again, at least 8 dead so far. We're told 2 were being taken into surgery at one of the local hospitals, Bellevue. Let's go back to correspondent David Lee Miller, who's live on the scene with an update there. David Lee.
Bret, the scene here in Lower Manhattan, increasingly eerie at this hour. There are hundreds of New York City police on the streets. There are also trick-or-treaters, very young children in costume, walking up and down to get candy. All this in the shadow of the World Trade Center. We're going to pan up here and you can get a good sense of the geography here. That is the World Trade Center, less than half a mile away from where this terror attack occurred about 3 hours ago. A few moments ago, I talked to a witness, a 17-year-old girl who was under lockdown for 3 hours in Stuyvesant High School. That is a high school less than half a block from where this incident unfolded. She told me that she was able to watch what took place from one of the windows in the school. She said she saw 3 bicycles in the aftermath on the bikeway where the car ran over pedestrians and bikers. In her words, Bret, she told me she didn't know it was possible for bicycles. She saw 3 of them to be so twisted. She told me that they were completely destroyed by this truck that was used by the perpetrator. She also said she saw 2 bodies in body bags that were laying nearby. And as you can see, at this hour, now almost 4 hours after the incident began, Lower Manhattan still very much experiencing a very heavy security presence. You travel a few blocks from here, though, a very different scene. It might just be an ordinary day here in New York City. Underscoring that, the Halloween parade that is an annual event is going to take place tonight, and we are told that New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio is heading in that direction now. He wants to personally inspect the security at the parade site. He said earlier, though, Bret, that what happened here in Lower Manhattan was a cowardly act. At this hour, at least 8 dead, a dozen people injured. This now as the investigation continues. Bret.
David Lee Miller live on the scene. David Lee, thank you. This is obviously the first deadly terror attack in New York City since 9/11. And the governor talking about how New York is always in the crosshairs.
And the truth is, New York is an international symbol of freedom and democracy. That's what we are, and we are proud of it. That also makes us a target for those people who oppose those concepts. And we've lived with this before. We felt the pain before. We feel the pain today. But we go forward together, and we go forward stronger than ever. We're not going to let them win.
Back with the panel here, Guy, Mara, Mike, and Jillian. Guy, going forward, you wonder how this affects this town, if it does, and the politics that we're seeing on a number of fronts. Not only what we're seeing the U.S. military take on overseas, but also what they're taking on here up on Capitol Hill.
And it's an event like this that can instantly shift the entire national conversation. You know, this news cycle is going to be about tax reform and Russia, and now we have 8 people killed, apparently inspired by ISIS. You know, and just watching that report there from David Lee Miller, it popped into my head. They're having this parade in Lower Manhattan now. Imagine the difficulty that NYPD has. They're telling people to be vigilant and notice anything unusual. It's Halloween in New York. Everything's unusual. That adds to the burden on the first responders. So I sort of veered off from your question there, Bret, but I was, you know, I think it's really strong for Mayor de Blasio to make that statement and say, I'm going to the parade as well. I think that's great.
Just moments ago, Mara, Governor Cuomo announced enhanced security measures throughout Lower Manhattan. At the governor's direction, increased security at high-profile locations actually around New York, including airports, bridges, tunnels, mass transit systems. You have, following this terrorist attack, an increase in security at all of those places, additional personnel being deployed to high-density areas, large public gatherings, as a precautionary measure, not based, he says, on any specific intelligence on ongoing threats. But as you heard from Chairman McCall and Ron Hosko earlier, around the world they have seen increased chatter in recent months, to the point where you had the British MI6 head say it's the most dangerous he's seen it in years.
Well, you've got, as we've talked about many times, as ISIS gets squeezed in the Middle East, they're going to go somewhere. The ones that survive and leave are going to go somewhere, and they're going to go back to Europe. I don't know if this person came from there. We're going to find out a lot more about him. But sure, the threat is going to go elsewhere. But, you know, what's interesting, I'm a New Yorker. I'm proud of New York tonight. And we have seen other countries go through this, kind of hunker down. It's England, in all the NRA bombings, they never gave up and they didn't change their lifestyles, and eventually they solved that problem. And that sounds like something that we're going to have to do. I'm not saying it's a new normal, but people are not going to cower inside their apartments because of this.
And just the images on the screen, the cell phone video taken from above as it just changed out there, that's of the suspect who was running away from the car after hitting a bus filled with children, actually, some of them being treated at local hospitals. Mike, your final thoughts?
Well, I'm just thinking about the last 8 years, and I think the chickens are coming home to roost in many ways. Pulling out of Iraq, telling the world that we're leaving Afghanistan, doing nothing in Syria, and allowing this ideology to gain strength all over the world and to inspire jihadis all over the world. I think we're seeing, you know, it's going to take a while to undo that. I go back to the president's tweet in the sense that ISIS is not defeated. They're now dispersed, and we have to keep our foot on the neck around the world. And the more that they are worried about where they're going to sleep at night and a missile coming through their window, the less time they're going to have to plot and plan.
Jillian, your thoughts?
Looking at the live footage of Lower Manhattan there, it strikes me that amid all of this chaos and horror, the one fortunate data point is that New York City's Joint Terrorism Task Force is the oldest and best of its kind in this country. And they have managed to bring a greater degree of what looks like stability on the ground. But behind the scenes tonight, we know that the race is on to figure out a few key questions that will determine where this goes in the future. And I think we can rely on this terrorism task force, which brings to bear the best of NYPD and FBI elements on this situation. What they're going to be looking at tonight is essentially whether this person, the perpetrator, had any accomplices, and whether those, if he does, if they're still active, and whether or not they have any formal affiliations with any international terrorist organizations, and then those will guide the days ahead, but New York City is in good hands.
He's described as a 29-year-old Middle Eastern man by authorities. We're now, from our producer at the Justice Department, getting a name, Saifullo Saipov. We were told earlier that he may be an Uzbek national who came to the country in 2010, trying to get some more information about that. And there is some talk about a tie to Tampa, Florida, and we're trying to get ties to that. However, we did manage to pull up the picture of the ISIS cell phone near this event that happened, this attack today, and it does have, we're just getting it in here, it does have a picture of the cell phone itself, and if you can push in there, this is from Site. And you can see the ISIS logo, and in the background, this is the west side, right near the area where it occurred. You heard Chairman McCall reference this earlier in the interview. We're going to post that whole interview with the Chairman of House Homeland Security, and there's some interesting nuggets throughout that interview, namely that there are 1,000 ongoing investigations into jihadist terrorism or possible ties to terrorism in all 50 states. That is something that you have to think about as our country deals with yet another attack. A city that knows terror so well hit again, but New York City, of course, as we've been talking about, will persevere. This Halloween parade in the area is still scheduled to go on, and New York's mayor is going there right now. We'll continue to cover it here on Fox News Channel. Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and still unafraid.
Breaking new details.